Imagine a land bathed in golden sunlight, where the air carries the gentle warmth of a rising sun, and the horizon stretches endlessly, touched by the soft shimmer of water. This is the land of the ancient Egyptians, a civilization that flourished along the winding banks of the Nile River. For thousands of years, life in this fertile valley was intimately connected to the river that nourished it. The Nile was more than just a source of water, it was a lifeline, a steady companion, and sometimes a formidable force of nature. Today we will gently explore how the people of ancient Egypt lived with and survived the floods of the Nile, a recurring event that shaped their world, their society, and their very way of life. As we begin our journey, picture yourself standing on the sandy banks of the river. The water moves with a quiet rhythm, almost hypnotic in its flow. It rises and falls with the seasons, a natural clock that dictated the lives of those who lived beside it. In the early mornings, mist rises from the river's surface, curling slowly into the sky. Birds glide effortlessly over the water, their reflections mirrored in the calm currents. Farmers begin their daily routines, tending to fields that stretch far into the distance, yet all are aware of the river's changing moods. The Nile is both giver and taker, nurturing crops and communities, yet reminding all who dwell nearby of its immense power. For the ancient Egyptians, the flood season was a cycle as predictable as it was vital. Each year the Nile would swell, carrying rich, dark silt from distant lands. This fertile layer of earth would replenish the soil, making it ready for planting. And yet, despite its life-giving properties, the river's rising waters could be unpredictable and even dangerous. A calm season could suddenly turn into a flood that reshaped the land, washed away homes, and tested the resilience of every village along its banks. It is within this delicate balance of abundance and risk that the story of Egyptian survival unfolds, a story not of sudden heroics but of patience, observation, and subtle ingenuity. As we wander through this ancient landscape, we will explore how ordinary people met extraordinary challenges. We will imagine the quiet mornings spent preparing fields for planting, the careful attention paid to water levels, and the gentle, methodical construction of canals and embankments. This is not a tale of battlefields or kings in golden armor, but a story of daily life, adaptation, and the subtle genius of a civilization that learned to live in harmony with nature's rhythms. Every step along the Nile's edge, every decision made about when to plant, when to harvest, and how to protect their homes reflects a deep understanding of the environment, a knowledge honed over centuries of careful observation and practical experience. In this documentary, we invite you to drift through history as though you were floating along the river itself. Feel the warm sun on your skin, hear the gentle lapping of water against the banks, and imagine the soft rustle of papyrus leaves in the breeze. Allow the rhythm of the Nile to guide your thoughts, calming the mind and soothing the spirit, as we uncover how ancient Egyptians not only survived the floods but thrived because of them. Their story is one of quiet perseverance, careful planning, and a profound respect for the natural world. So let us begin our journey along the ancient Nile. With patience and gentle attention, we will watch as the river's waters rise and fall, shaping not just the landscape but the lives, beliefs, and daily routines of the people who depended on it. Together we will explore a civilization that understood the delicate balance between human life and nature, a balance that allowed them to flourish in one of the world's most remarkable environments. Sit back, relax, and let the serene flow of history carry you into the world of ancient Egypt and the enduring mystery of the Nile's floods. Before the floods arrived, life along the Nile unfolded with a gentle, predictable rhythm. The early mornings carried a soft, golden light that slowly warmed the sandy banks and the fields beyond. Families stirred from their homes, the smell of baked bread and roasted grains mingling with the earthy scent of the river. Villages were clusters of mud brick houses, low and modest, yet designed with careful thought. Flat roofs allowed the sun to dry the clay walls during the day, and small courtyards provided shaded space where children played and animals rested. Life was simple, measured, and intimately tied to the earth. The people of ancient Egypt were deeply observant of their surroundings. Farmers moved with purpose, yet not in haste. They understood the subtle cues of the environment, the whisper of the wind through the papyrus, the murmur of the river, even the behavior of birds overhead. Every detail held meaning. A calm breeze might signal a good day for planting, while darkening clouds far upstream might hint at changes yet to come. This attentiveness was not born of fear but of respect for the natural world. Their survival depended on it, yet it also brought a sense of harmony and connection that made daily life quietly comforting. Crops were the heart of daily life. Fields of emmer wheat, barley and flax stretched across the fertile floodplain. Farmers tended these lands with care, their hands familiar with the soil's texture and richness. Irrigation channels gently carried water from the river to the fields, ensuring a steady supply. Though the Nile had not yet begun its seasonal swell, these preparations were crucial. Communities often worked together, reinforcing a sense of quiet camaraderie, as men and women dug canals, repaired dikes and ensured that each plot of land was ready for the season ahead. In this way, life was both individual and communal, a delicate balance that allowed villages to thrive. Beyond the fields, the villages themselves had their own peaceful rhythm. Children played near the riverbanks, their laughter mingling with the soft sounds of water lapping against mud walls. Women tended to household tasks, grinding grains, weaving cloth, and preparing meals. Men might carve wooden tools or repair simple boats, moving at a steady pace that matched the leisurely flow of the Nile. At sunset, families gathered to share meals, exchanging quiet stories of the day, while the sky turned a soft orange-pink. There was a sense of calm continuity, a reassuring knowledge that the river would continue to provide, and that life, for now, was stable. Religious life was intertwined with daily routines. Temples and shrines, modest or grand, dotted the landscape. Priests maintained quiet rituals, offering thanks to the gods who were believed to govern the river and the land. Even in the smallest villages, people practiced gentle forms of devotion, leaving small offerings or whispering prayers for a good harvest. These rituals brought comfort and structure, providing a subtle psychological framework that helped communities feel secure amid the uncertainties of the natural world. Faith and routine flowed together, much like the Nile itself, steady and reassuring. Social bonds were equally important. Villages were tight-knit, and neighbors relied on one another. Shared work in the fields, communal construction of simple homes or granaries, and the exchange of goods reinforced these bonds. There was an unspoken understanding that life depended on cooperation, patience, and attentiveness. In these quiet moments, one could sense the slow pulse of society, deliberate, patient, and gently thriving. Life here was not hurried or chaotic. It was a series of measured steps, like the slow rolling flow of the river that sustained them. Even the natural world contributed to this calm environment. Birds and insects moved rhythmically, their sounds blending into the soft murmur of water and wind. Papyrus reeds swayed gently along the riverbanks, and fish darted through the shallow waters, occasionally breaking the surface. The land was alive, but in a gentle, non-threatening way. For the people of Egypt, this world was both familiar and nourishing, a steady companion that allowed life to flourish in a slow, peaceful cadence. Yet beneath this calm there was a quiet awareness of what was to come. Farmers and villagers knew the river would rise, that the annual flood would arrive, bringing both life and challenge. And so even in these serene moments there was preparation, a careful, patient readiness that would help them navigate the changes ahead. It was a delicate balance between enjoying the present, tending to the land, and respecting the rhythm of the Nile. In these tranquil days before the floods, one could see the essence of Egyptian life, a gentle harmony between humans and nature, a patient observance of the world around them, and a deep understanding that survival was not only about strength but about careful attention, foresight, and cooperation. It is in this calm world that we begin to appreciate the extraordinary ways in which humans adapted, ensuring that life continued, season after season, year after year. The Nile River is more than just a river. It is a quiet, flowing force that has shaped life, culture, and civilization along its banks for thousands of years. Stretching over 4,000 miles, it begins far to the south, meandering through mountains, valleys, and deserts before reaching the gentle plains of Egypt. For the ancient Egyptians, the river was a constant companion, a living entity whose movements dictated the rhythm of daily life. To understand how they survived the floods, we must first understand the river itself, its behavior, its cycles, and its subtle moods. Geographically, the Nile is a remarkable phenomenon. Two main tributaries, the White Nile and the Blue Nile, converge near what is now Khartoum in Sudan. The White Nile flows steadily, a calm and dependable source, while the Blue Nile is seasonal, swelling dramatically during the rainy months far upstream in the Ethiopian highlands. Together they create a river that is generous and life-giving, yet also capable of overwhelming force. The Egyptians came to learn these nuances over centuries of careful observation, noting not just the arrival of the waters but the subtle signs that hinted at the size and timing of the flood. The climate of the Nile Valley adds another layer to this story. Egypt is largely arid with vast stretches of desert surrounding the fertile riverbanks. Yet along the Nile, the land is lush and vibrant, a ribbon of green winding through golden sands. The contrast is striking on one side, the harsh, dry desert, on the other the fertile floodplain teeming with crops and life. The river is the dividing line between scarcity and abundance, a gentle yet essential lifeline that brings sustenance to all who depend upon it. In this way, the Nile was both a sanctuary and a challenge, a gift of nature that demanded respect and attentiveness. Seasonal changes were the heartbeat of the Nile. Each year, as the summer rains fell far to the south, the Blue Nile swelled, carrying rich, dark silt down into Egypt. This silt settled on the floodplain, replenishing the soil and making it fertile for crops. The river rose gradually, sometimes quietly, sometimes with surprising force, covering the fields and reshaping the land. Ancient Egyptians observed these patterns with a careful eye. Farmers and villagers would notice the smallest changes, the color of the water, the level of flow, the movement of fish, and interpret them as signs of what was to come. This knowledge, passed down through generations, became the foundation of agricultural planning and survival. Understanding the Nile was not merely about predicting water levels, it was about reading the landscape as a whole. Seasonal winds, cloud formations, and even the behavior of animals all provided clues. Egyptians learned to synchronize their activities with the river's cycles, planting crops when the waters receded and harvesting at the precise moment to maximize yield. Canals and irrigation ditches were constructed with careful attention to slope and flow, ensuring that the water nourished rather than destroyed. In every sense, their survival depended on observation, patience, and subtle engineering that worked in harmony with the river rather than against it. The river also shaped more than just agriculture. It influenced trade, settlement patterns, and cultural practices. Villages grew along its banks, their locations chosen for access to water, fertile land, and protection from sudden floods. Boats glided across its surface, carrying goods, people, and ideas. The Nile was the primary highway of ancient Egypt, connecting distant regions and fostering a shared identity along its course. In this way, the river became a silent thread weaving together the social and economic fabric of the civilization. Yet, the abundance of the Nile brought unpredictability. Some years the floods were gentle, depositing just the right amount of silt. Other years they could be excessive, overwhelming fields, washing away homes and challenging communities to adapt quickly. It is in this delicate balance that the story of Egyptian survival truly emerges. Life along the Nile was a continual negotiation with nature, a quiet dialogue between human understanding and the river's immense power. The people learned to respect the river, to anticipate its movements, and to prepare for both bounty and challenge. Even today, one can imagine the gentle rhythm of the Nile flowing through the valley, the water reflecting the soft light of morning, carrying life and nutrients to the land it touches. For the ancient Egyptians, this river was not merely a geographic feature, it was a living, breathing presence that demanded attention, understanding, and reverence. Their daily lives, their work, and their very survival were intricately connected to its moods, its cycles, and its quiet majesty. By understanding the Nile, the geography, the seasonal patterns, and the interplay of abundance and unpredictability, we begin to grasp how the Egyptians came to live in harmony with such a powerful natural force. It was not by luck that they survived the floods, but through centuries of careful observation, communal effort, and an almost instinctive knowledge of the land and water that sustained them. And it is this knowledge, passed down and refined over generations, that allowed them to thrive along the riverbanks, despite the challenges that each flood season would inevitably bring. As the seasons gradually shifted, a subtle change swept through the Nile Valley. The air, once warm and still, carried a hint of dampness, and the river's surface seemed fuller, more restless. It was as if the river itself was preparing for its annual transformation. Villagers noticed these early signs with careful attention. Farmers would pause in their work, feeling the moisture in the soil, and observing the reflections on the water. The birds, normally so steady in their routines, flew a little higher, or settled quietly among the papyrus reeds. Every small change, every quiet movement was a gentle reminder that the flood season was near. The rising waters were a slow, deliberate force. Day by day, the river encroached further onto the banks, softening the earth and expanding into small inlets. Children playing near the edges of the fields might notice the gentle trickle of water creeping into familiar spaces. Farmers and laborers, while calm in demeanor, began their careful preparations. Canals were inspected, embankments reinforced, and low-lying homes readied for the inevitable touch of the river. In these moments, the Nile transformed from a friend to a quiet, powerful presence demanding respect and attentiveness. There was an almost hypnotic rhythm to this process. The water advanced slowly but steadily, spreading into the fields, saturating the soil, and leaving behind a fine layer of dark, fertile silt. This silt, although life-giving, was also a reminder of the river's potential power. Villagers watched as their surroundings subtly changed. The familiar contours of the land softened, small pools formed, and the sound of water against reeds and mud walls became a constant background murmur. It was a sound both soothing and commanding, a gentle reminder of the delicate balance between abundance and danger. The approach of the flood brought contrast to the daily routines of the people. On one hand, life continued as usual. Children played, women carried water and prepared meals, and farmers tended to crops that had not yet been overtaken. On the other hand, there was a quiet awareness that the river would soon alter everything. This tension was never abrupt or frightening. It was a patient, slow-building presence that invited careful attention rather than alarm. In a way, the flood was a teacher, reminding the community of nature's rhythm and the need to adapt with foresight and patience. The sensory experience of the flood was rich and detailed. The river, swollen from distant rains, reflected the soft light of the sun in deeper shades, sometimes a muted gray or rich brown. The air grew humid, carrying the scent of wet soil and vegetation. Tiny insects and birds seemed to sense the change, moving differently than before. At night, the sound of the river gently lapping against newly submerged banks became a lullaby of sorts, a constant reminder that life was shifting, yet in a steady, predictable rhythm. In preparation, communities reinforced their defenses. Simple embankments of mud and reeds were strengthened, and small channels were dug to redirect water away from homes and critical farmland. Villagers moved with deliberate calm, almost meditative in their actions. Every step was measured, every movement purposeful, reflecting generations of accumulated wisdom about how to live with the river rather than against it. There was no panic, only thoughtful, gentle activity, a quiet choreography with nature that had been perfected over centuries. The flood also brought moments of reflection. Elders would sit quietly along the banks, observing the water as it crept forward. They might recall past seasons, remembering both the bountiful harvests and the years when the river tested the community's resilience. Children listened to these stories, absorbing subtle lessons about patience, preparation, and respect for natural forces. In this way, the arrival of the flood was as much a cultural and spiritual experience as it was a physical one. It reinforced the interconnectedness of life, work, and nature, and offered a rhythm to the year that was both calming and instructive. As the water continued to rise, the transformation of the landscape became more pronounced. Fields once dry were now shallow pools, and small patches of mud reflected the sky above. Trees and reeds bent slightly under the weight of the encroaching water, and the river seemed to expand with quiet authority. Villagers walked carefully along the newly softened ground, adjusting their routines to accommodate the gentle invasion of water. In every action there was an acceptance of the river's power, a recognition that life along the Nile required patience, attentiveness, and adaptability. It is in this slow, deliberate unfolding that the beauty of the flood becomes apparent. The Nile did not arrive with sudden fury. It flowed with grace, carrying nutrients and life-giving silt that would nourish the fields for months to come. Though it disrupted daily routines, it also promised renewal and abundance. The people of Egypt, guided by centuries of observation, knew how to work with this rhythm. They understood that survival was not a matter of control but of harmony, a patient, steady engagement with the natural world that allowed communities to flourish despite the river's immense power. By the time the river reached its peak, villages were ready. Canals, embankments, and levees channeled the water gently, protecting homes while allowing fields to benefit from the rich silt deposits. Life slowed in a deliberate, calm manner, mirroring the river itself. The flood, though potentially dangerous, became a natural part of the year's rhythm, a quiet teacher of patience, cooperation, and careful planning. And so, as the waters of the Nile spread across the land, the people of ancient Egypt met the challenge not with fear but with measured calm, understanding, and the quiet ingenuity that would allow them to thrive for millennia to come. For the ancient Egyptians, the arrival of the Nile's floods was never a surprise. Generations had observed the river's movements, recording subtle changes and patterns, slowly developing a rhythm of life in harmony with its flow. The first responses to the floods were rooted in careful attention, watching, noting, and predicting. Farmers, herders, and villagers learned to interpret signs from the land, the water, and even the sky. They knew that the smallest cues, the color of the river, the height of its banks, or the behavior of animals, could indicate how much water would arrive and when. This quiet, patient observation was the foundation of survival, allowing communities to anticipate challenges and plan accordingly. One of the earliest strategies involved simple engineering. Mud embankments were built along vulnerable sections of the river, designed to divert water away from homes and granaries. Canals were dug to guide excess water toward fields that could benefit from irrigation. These measures were not large-scale projects at first, but subtle, deliberate modifications of the landscape, carefully crafted to work with the river rather than against it. Villagers worked together in calm, methodical ways, reinforcing dikes, clearing small channels, and monitoring water levels as the floodwaters slowly advanced. There was a quiet rhythm to these preparations, almost meditative, blending human ingenuity with the natural world. Seasonal farming schedules were another early response. Communities learned to plant crops in accordance with the flood cycle, sowing seeds just after the waters receded. The silt deposited by the river provided fertile soil, ensuring a rich harvest. Fields were rotated and carefully managed, and planting was done in stages, following the subtle patterns of the river's rise and fall. This approach required patience and timing, but it also offered a gentle sense of security. Villagers understood that the river, though powerful, was reliable in its cycle, and that careful planning could turn potential disruption into abundance. Observation extended beyond the river itself. Egyptians paid attention to rainfall in distant regions, particularly the Ethiopian highlands which fed the Blue Nile. They noted the direction of the wind, the behavior of clouds, and the arrival of migratory birds. Every detail offered insight into what the coming flood might bring. Communities gradually built a mental map of the river's behavior, refined over generations. This knowledge allowed them to respond with precision, avoiding the chaos of being unprepared while ensuring that the flood's benefits were fully utilized. The early Egyptians also developed communal strategies. Flood preparation was rarely an individual task, it required the cooperation of neighbors and extended families. Villages coordinated the construction and maintenance of canals, dikes, and embankments. Granaries were collectively stocked to provide food security in case of local disruptions. Even simple tasks like clearing small debris from water channels were undertaken with a sense of shared purpose. There was no rush or panic, only the steady, deliberate understanding that survival depended on cooperation and careful planning. Daily life adjusted gently to the flood season. Children played in areas safely above the waterline, observing the river's subtle changes. Women tended to household tasks in quieter, elevated spaces, weaving cloth or grinding grain while keeping an eye on the rising water. Men focused on reinforcing infrastructure and preparing tools for the harvest once the flood receded. The flood reshaped routines, but it did so in a way that emphasized calm, deliberate adaptation rather than fear. The river dictated pace, but it also provided structure and rhythm, guiding communities through the year in a steady, predictable cadence. Religious and cultural practices were intertwined with these responses. Egyptians performed rituals to honor the river and its deities, seeking guidance and protection. These ceremonies offered comfort and a sense of order, framing the flood as a natural, almost sacred event. Villagers might leave offerings along the banks or engage in quiet prayers, acknowledging the power of the river and expressing gratitude for its life-giving properties. In doing so, they combined practical preparation with spiritual reflection, creating a holistic approach to living with nature's cycles. The ingenuity of these early responses is remarkable in its subtlety. The Egyptians did not attempt to dominate the river with grand, forceful interventions. Instead, they observed, adapted, and gently guided its effects. Canals were aligned with the natural slope of the land, dikes were reinforced without disturbing the river's flow, and planting schedules followed the rhythm of rising and receding waters. Their approach was not hurried or reactive, it was thoughtful, measured, and designed for sustainability. Through these quiet strategies, they transformed a potential threat into an opportunity, harnessing the river's power to support agriculture, community stability, and long-term survival. Even in the smallest villages, these responses were evident. A farmer checking the height of his canal, an elder offering advice on where to place embankments, a child watching the river and noting changes in the soil, all of these actions reflected a shared understanding of the delicate balance between human life and the natural world. Over time, these practices became second nature, embedded in the daily rhythms of life along the Nile. They were lessons passed from parent to child, from generation to generation, forming a living tradition of careful observation, patient adaptation, and quiet ingenuity. By observing, predicting, and subtly manipulating the environment, the early Egyptians laid the foundation for centuries of survival and prosperity. The flood, while potentially dangerous, became a predictable and manageable element of life. Communities learned to meet the river with respect, preparation, and gentle intervention, ensuring that both people and crops could thrive. In this way, the story of the Nile is not just about water or flooding, it is about human resilience, patient intelligence, and the quiet, enduring capacity to live in harmony with the world around us. As the centuries passed, the people of ancient Egypt developed increasingly sophisticated ways to live in harmony with the Nile. Simple embankments and canals, effective as they were, eventually gave way to more intricate water management systems. The Egyptians recognized that survival depended not just on observing the river but on gently guiding its power. Through careful engineering, they transformed the landscape in subtle yet profound ways, ensuring that the river nourished rather than disrupted their villages and fields. One of the earliest and most essential techniques was the construction of levees. These raised embankments, made from compacted mud and reinforced with reeds, were placed strategically along the riverbanks. Villagers carefully monitored the height and thickness of these structures, repairing cracks and reinforcing weak sections as needed. Levees acted as quiet guardians, allowing the floodwaters to rise safely while protecting homes and critical farmland. Their construction required patience and communal effort, with families working together in a calm, deliberate rhythm that mirrored the river itself. In addition to levees, the Egyptians developed a network of canals. These channels were designed to redirect water into fields, ensuring that crops received the nourishment they needed without flooding the village. Canals were carved along gentle slopes, following the natural contours of the land to allow water to flow slowly and evenly. Maintenance was ongoing, with villagers clearing silt and debris to keep the channels open. This careful stewardship of the waterways created a subtle, harmonious system in which humans guided the river rather than confronting it directly. Basins were another innovative solution. Fields were divided into shallow, rectangular depressions which could be intentionally flooded during the peak of the season. These basins allowed water to settle and gradually seep into the soil, enriching it with the river's nutrients. Once the flood receded, the fields were ready for planting, their dark, fertile silt providing the foundation for abundant crops. This approach required careful timing, observation, and coordination, but it offered a quiet reassurance that the land could be both productive and protected, even in the face of nature's immense power. Engineering against nature was not only practical but also deeply rhythmic. Villagers moved with measured, deliberate steps, reinforcing dikes, maintaining canals, and monitoring water levels. Each action was slow and purposeful, almost meditative, reflecting a centuries-old understanding of the river's behavior. Unlike modern engineering projects driven by speed or efficiency, these systems grew organically over generations, refined by observation, trial, and experience. There was a gentle elegance to their approach, a balance between human ingenuity and the rhythms of the natural world. The use of sluices and gates further enhanced control over water distribution. Wooden barriers could be opened or closed to direct flow into specific areas, allowing farmers to manage irrigation precisely. These mechanisms required careful attention as timing was crucial. Too early or too late, and water could either stagnate or overflow. Yet, the Egyptians approached this work with calm confidence, guided by experience and the quiet knowledge that the river's patterns, though complex, were not random. There was an almost hypnotic flow to these routines, each movement measured, each decision considered, creating an enduring sense of order and stability. Water management also extended to storage. Granaries and reservoirs collected water and food to safeguard against years when floods were lower than expected. Communities learned to combine engineering with foresight, ensuring that both people and crops could endure variability in the river's behavior. These systems were subtle but powerful, demonstrating that survival was not just about immediate response but about long-term planning, patience, and harmony with the environment. Beyond the practical benefits, these engineering feats shaped the culture and daily life of Egypt. Villages were connected by canals and small waterways which doubled as transportation routes. Boats moved quietly across these channels, carrying food, tools, and even messages between communities. The gentle hum of flowing water became part of the ambient rhythm of life, a soothing backdrop to work, play, and domestic routines. It was as if the river, guided by human hands, had become a silent partner in the daily rhythm of civilization. Even the construction techniques themselves reflected a careful observation of natural processes. Mud bricks were allowed to dry slowly, embankments were tested and reinforced with each season, and canals were aligned to minimize erosion. Nothing was rushed, each intervention was deliberate, small in scale, and designed to coexist with the river's natural cycle. Over time, these practices became refined, creating a complex system that balanced abundance and safety, allowing communities to thrive year after year. Through these subtle, patient measures, the Egyptians transformed a potentially destructive force into a foundation for life and prosperity. The river's floods, once unpredictable and overwhelming, were now guided, channeled, and controlled with ingenuity and care. Villages flourished along the banks, crops thrived in carefully managed fields, and communities experienced a quiet, steady security. Life along the Nile had become a collaboration between human insight and natural rhythm, a harmonious dance in which the river's power was acknowledged, respected, and embraced. By observing, adapting, and engineering with patience, the Egyptians demonstrated a profound understanding of their environment. Their work was never hurried or forceful, it was deliberate, graceful, and in tune with the steady rhythm of the Nile. In these quiet interventions, levees, canals, basins, and sluices, they found the key to survival, and in doing so they created a civilization that endured not by conquering nature but by listening to it, learning from it, and moving gently with its flow. Life along the Nile was a rhythm, gentle and deliberate, guided by the river's seasonal ebb and flow. Central to this rhythm was farming, the quiet heartbeat of Egyptian civilization. From the moment the floodwaters receded, communities moved with calm purpose to prepare the fields, ensuring that the fertile soil left behind would yield an abundant harvest. Farming was not hurried, it was a careful, deliberate process, observed and refined over countless generations. The people had learned to anticipate the river's gifts and to plan their activities in harmony with nature. The first task after the floods was to ready the fields. Villagers walked along the soft, wet earth, feeling its texture with bare feet and hands, assessing its readiness for planting. Tools were simple but effective: wooden plows guided by oxen, handheld hoes, and baskets for seeds. The silt deposited by the Nile was rich and dark, full of nutrients, and its presence was a promise of abundance. Farmers knew that timing was crucial; planting too early or too late could reduce yields. Yet even within this careful planning, there was a quiet satisfaction, a sense that working in step with the river was itself a form of harmony. Crops were chosen with foresight. Emmer wheat and barley were staples, providing nourishment for daily meals and the foundation for beer, an important part of Egyptian life. Flax, grown for its fibers, supported weaving and clothing production. Vegetables such as onions, garlic, and lentils supplemented the diet, while papyrus along the riverbanks provided materials for writing and crafts. Planting was staggered, with seeds sown in stages to maximize the land's productivity. This careful rhythm of sowing and tending ensured a steady supply of food, even as the floodwaters shaped and enriched the soil. Water management was a constant companion in the fields. Canals and basins, carefully maintained, delivered just enough water to nourish crops without causing damage. Farmers observed the subtle rise and fall of moisture, adjusting their methods as needed. Irrigation was not hurried or forced, it was a gentle, patient guidance of water into the areas where it was most beneficial. In this way, the land itself seemed to respond to human care, flourishing under the careful balance of natural rhythm and thoughtful intervention. Food security extended beyond the fields. Granaries were carefully constructed, often elevated to avoid seasonal flooding, and stocked with surplus grain. These storage facilities were quiet symbols of foresight and preparedness. They ensured that communities could endure years when the flood was less generous or when other challenges arose. Villagers took care to monitor the condition of stored grain, replacing spoiled portions and maintaining cleanliness. The act of preparing granaries was as much a ritual of calm reassurance as it was a practical necessity, reinforcing a sense of stability and continuity. The work of farming was a shared effort. Families collaborated in planting, tending, and harvesting, creating a gentle rhythm of communal activity. Elders guided younger members in techniques refined over generations, and children observed and gradually participated, learning the delicate art of timing, soil care, and water management. Cooperation was quiet and measured, a dance of patience and attentiveness that mirrored the river itself. In these daily acts, the community both survived and thrived, strengthened by the steady flow of the seasons and the river's predictable generosity. Harvest time brought its own gentle excitement. Crops were cut carefully, gathered into bundles, and carried to storage or marketplaces. There was no rush. The work proceeded at a steady, comforting pace. Villagers knew that each bundle of grain, each carefully tended field, represented months of patient observation, preparation, and collaboration. The harvest was both a reward and a reminder of the importance of living in harmony with natural cycles, a tangible reflection of the quiet diligence that underpinned Egyptian life. In addition to sustaining people, these agricultural practices supported the broader society. Grain could be traded or used to pay labor, and surplus supported temple activities and construction projects. The river, the fields, and the granaries together formed a network of stability, allowing civilization to expand and thrive without confrontation with nature. Life was structured, orderly, and secure, built upon a foundation of careful attention to the land and its rhythms. Even in the quieter moments, the connection between farming and the river was apparent. The soft murmur of water in the canals, the rich scent of freshly turned soil, and the sight of crops swaying gently in the breeze all reinforced the subtle understanding that survival was a partnership with nature. Farmers moved slowly and deliberately, responding to the land's cues, guiding the water and nurturing the growth of crops. It was a cycle of calm diligence where patience and attentiveness yielded both sustenance and tranquility. Farming and food security, therefore, were not merely practical concerns, they were central to the rhythm of life along the Nile. They demonstrated the quiet intelligence of the Egyptians, their ability to observe, plan, and adapt. Each planting season, each careful harvest, and each well-maintained granary was a testament to the enduring balance between human effort and natural cycles. Through these practices, communities built resilience, ensuring that even in years when the floods were unpredictable, life could continue with calm confidence and quiet assurance. By understanding the cycles of the river, managing water gently, and storing surplus with care, the Egyptians created a civilization where survival was intertwined with harmony. Farming and food security were not rushed or forced, they were deliberate, measured, and deeply connected to the rhythms of the land. In these routines we see a profound lesson in patience, foresight, and gentle collaboration, a lesson that allowed the people of ancient Egypt to thrive along the ever-changing banks of the Nile. The Nile was not only a physical lifeline for the ancient Egyptians, it was also a spiritual one. The river was woven into the very fabric of their beliefs, a divine presence whose moods and cycles guided life, work, and thought. For generations, Egyptians recognized that their survival was intimately connected to the rhythms of the Nile, and in turn they honored it through rituals, prayers, and ceremonies. This spiritual dimension provided calm reassurance, creating a sense of harmony between humans and nature that extended beyond practical preparation. Central to this belief was the worship of Hapi, the god of the Nile. Hapi was imagined as a gentle, nourishing presence, a deity who ensured the river's timely rise and provided the fertile silt that sustained crops. Offerings were made to Hapi, ranging from small tokens of food to elaborate rituals performed in temples along the riverbanks. Villagers approached these ceremonies with quiet reverence, understanding that their participation was both a spiritual act and a form of practical engagement with the world around them. It was a gentle, meditative acknowledgement of forces greater than themselves. Rituals often coincided with the cycles of the river. At the start of the flood season, priests and villagers alike would gather along the banks, observing the rising waters while performing ceremonies to honor the god. Small fires might be lit and offerings placed in the water or on the shores, symbolically thanking Hapi for the coming abundance and seeking protection from potential excess. These ceremonies were not hurried or dramatic, they were rhythmic, deliberate, and calming, reflecting the slow, measured pace of life along the Nile. Participants moved in gentle, synchronized actions, echoing the river's own flow. Even daily practices were infused with spiritual meaning. Families might offer a portion of their food to the river, whisper prayers of gratitude, or leave symbolic items among the reeds. Children learned these customs as part of their upbringing, absorbing lessons about respect, patience, and humility. The act of acknowledging the river's power and generosity reinforced a sense of security and connection, making the unpredictable rise and fall of the floodwaters a natural, even comforting aspect of life. Temples along the Nile were more than centers of worship, they were also hubs of community cohesion. Large gatherings allowed villagers to share knowledge, observe the river together, and participate in collective rituals. These events strengthened social bonds, reinforcing the idea that survival was a shared responsibility and that the river, though powerful, could be navigated through cooperation, observation, and respect. The calm rhythm of these gatherings reflected the larger rhythm of life itself, creating a soothing, predictable cadence amid the subtle uncertainty of the flood season. Festivals celebrated the river's life-giving power. During these occasions, music, soft chanting, and the gentle movement of participants along the riverbanks created a serene and immersive atmosphere. Boats might be decorated and offerings carried ceremoniously along canals, blending practical gratitude with spiritual celebration. The slow, deliberate pace of the festivals mirrored the flow of water, reinforcing a sense of unity and calm. Through these shared experiences, communities could collectively reflect on the balance between human effort and the river's generous cycles. Symbolism in art and architecture further reflected the Nile's spiritual significance. Reliefs in temples depicted harpies surrounded by offerings, flanked by waterfowl and lotus flowers, emphasizing fertility, abundance, and tranquility. Hieroglyphs often referenced the river as both a physical and spiritual force, a lifeline intertwined with divine guidance. Even in the smallest villages, decorations and symbols served as gentle reminders of the river's omnipresence, reinforcing a sense of order, reassurance, and quiet mindfulness. The psychological impact of these beliefs was profound. By framing the river's fluctuations as part of a divine plan, Egyptians reduced anxiety and created a sense of continuity. The flood, though powerful and potentially disruptive, was interpreted as a natural, even benevolent occurrence. Villagers approached each season with patience, calm preparation, and trust in the rhythms of life. Spiritual understanding thus complemented practical measures such as levees, irrigation, and granaries, forming a holistic system that nurtured both body and mind. Even in moments of solitude along the river, the spiritual connection was evident. An individual might pause to watch the slow rise of water, feeling the gentle swell against the banks, and offer a silent prayer of gratitude or hope. The soft rustle of reeds, the distant call of birds, and the quiet flow of water created an immersive, meditative environment. In these moments, life along the Nile was not just about survival, it was about deep awareness, reflection, and a serene alignment with the natural and spiritual world. By weaving religion, ritual, and reverence into daily life, the Egyptians achieved a subtle harmony with the river. Practical measures ensured physical survival, but spiritual engagement provided emotional and psychological stability. Life along the Nile became a slow, deliberate rhythm, guided by water, observation, and faith. Communities thrived not only because of engineering and agriculture, but because their understanding of the river encompassed body, mind, and spirit, creating a gentle, enduring balance that allowed them to navigate the cycles of the flood with calm confidence. Life along the Nile was never faced alone. From the smallest village to bustling riverine towns, survival depended on community, cooperation, and the gentle rhythm of shared work. Though the floods could rise unpredictably, the people of ancient Egypt met each season with quiet preparedness, drawing on traditions passed down through generations. These stories of survival, though subtle and unhurried, illustrate the resilience of a civilization built not on sudden heroics but on careful observation, thoughtful planning, and mutual support. In a small village nestled along a bend of the Nile, families began their annual preparations weeks before the floodwaters arrived. Elders walked along the banks, inspecting embankments and canals, while younger villagers carried mud and reeds to reinforce weak spots. Children, too, were involved in gentle ways, helping to carry small baskets of materials or observing the adults' measured movements. Each person, no matter their age or role, contributed to a collective rhythm of preparation. There was no rush, only a quiet, steady effort that mirrored the river itself. The flood season also inspired remarkable ingenuity. In one story, a village faced unusually high waters that threatened to submerge fields critical for the coming harvest. The villagers collaborated to dig temporary channels, redirecting the excess water into nearby basins. Families took turns working along the muddy banks, moving slowly and methodically, ensuring that no part of the project was rushed or overlooked. By the end of the day, the water had been successfully guided away from homes and critical crops. The relief was quiet but profound, a testament to the power of calm collective effort. Cooperation extended beyond engineering solutions. Granaries were stocked communally, with surplus grain distributed to families whose fields had been partially flooded. Villagers shared tools, labor, and knowledge, ensuring that no household faced the challenge alone. In this way, even minor disruptions in one area were softened by the support of the larger community. The flood, though potentially dangerous, became an opportunity to reinforce bonds, share resources, and practice patience and foresight. Daily routines adapted to the changing environment as well. Women might adjust cooking schedules to accommodate water collection or travel along safer paths to markets and neighbors. Men monitored water levels in canals, reinforcing embankments as needed. Children learned the subtle art of observation, noting the river's rise and fall and understanding how small changes could impact the village. These adaptations were not hurried or stressful, they were deliberate, gentle adjustments that allowed life to continue in a calm and predictable rhythm despite the shifting waters. Spiritual practices were also woven into these survival strategies. Families might offer prayers or small tokens to Hapi, the god of the Nile, seeking protection and guidance. Elders shared stories of previous floods, recounting both challenges and successes, reinforcing lessons in patience, preparation, and respect for the river. These narratives served as both practical instruction and gentle reassurance, reminding younger generations that survival was a product of observation, collaboration, and harmony with nature. Even minor personal stories reveal the quiet heroism of everyday life. Consider a family whose small plot of farmland was threatened by encroaching water. Rather than panicking, they worked alongside neighbors to reinforce the levee separating their field from the river. The work was slow, deliberate, and carefully coordinated. By the time the water reached its peak, the field was protected, and the family's crops survived. There was no dramatic celebration, only quiet satisfaction and relief, a subtle but profound victory born of calm determination and communal effort. Communication played a key role in survival. Villagers learned to read the signs of the river and share observations. A slight discoloration of the water might signal that rainfall far upstream was heavier than usual. A sudden shift in the behavior of birds could indicate impending changes in currents. By exchanging this information in a measured and thoughtful way, communities could anticipate challenges before they became crises. This network of shared knowledge strengthened bonds, reinforced trust, and allowed survival strategies to be refined over generations. Beyond practical measures, there was a psychological component to these stories. The quiet shared experiences of preparation, observation, and gentle adaptation created a sense of collective resilience. Life along the Nile demanded patience and attention, and the successful navigation of each flood season reinforced confidence in the community's ability to endure. Individuals felt supported, and the subtle rhythm of communal action became a source of comfort, allowing people to meet challenges with calm resolve rather than anxiety. Even the festivals and rituals of the Nile were woven into survival practices. By collectively honoring the river, villagers acknowledged its power, expressed gratitude for its benefits, and sought protection from its potential dangers. The rhythmic chanting, quiet offerings, and gentle movements during these ceremonies reinforced a sense of cohesion, patience, and steady reassurance. Life and spirituality were intertwined, creating a gentle balance that supported both the physical and emotional well-being of communities facing the annual floods. Through these stories, we see a civilization built on quiet perseverance. There were no dramatic battles or heroic feats in the traditional sense. Instead, survival relied on observation, planning, collaboration, and trust in both the river and the people who lived beside it. Each flood season tested these principles, and each successful navigation reinforced the enduring wisdom of communities that had learned to coexist with nature's cycles. In the end, the story of survival along the Nile is a story of harmony. Villages thrived because people observed carefully, acted deliberately, and worked together with patience and care. The floods, while potentially disruptive, became a manageable part of life. Through subtle heroism, communal effort, and a deep understanding of the river, the Egyptians ensured not only survival but a quiet, enduring prosperity. And in this calm, steady approach we find lessons that echo across millennia, that patience, cooperation and attentive care can transform challenges into opportunities, and that resilience often takes the form of quiet, deliberate action rather than dramatic confrontation. The Nile's floods did more than provide fertile soil and sustain crops, they shaped the very fabric of Egyptian civilization. Over centuries, the patterns of the river influenced the growth of cities, the design of architecture, the organization of society, and even the beliefs and rituals of the people. By observing, adapting, and planning carefully, Egyptians transformed what could have been a recurring threat into a foundation for enduring stability. The long-term impacts of the floods were subtle yet profound, touching every aspect of life along the riverbanks. Agriculture remained at the heart of these changes. Repeated flooding deposited layers of nutrient-rich silt that renewed the soil season after season. This natural fertility allowed farmers to maintain consistent crop yields, which in turn supported population growth and the expansion of settlements. Villages became towns and towns became cities, all while maintaining a delicate balance with the land. The quiet rhythm of planting, harvesting, and storing grain became deeply embedded in societal organization, linking economic stability to the natural ebb and flow of the river. Water management techniques, refined over generations, became more sophisticated and far-reaching. Levees, canals, basins, and sluices evolved into integrated networks that controlled irrigation, protected settlements, and maximized agricultural output. These innovations were passed down, refined, and codified, forming the backbone of infrastructure that supported both everyday life and larger state projects. The success of these systems demonstrates how patience, observation, and incremental improvement allowed humans to coexist harmoniously with nature rather than dominate it. The annual floods also shaped architecture. Houses were constructed with raised floors and flat roofs, both to accommodate seasonal water and to create cooler living spaces in the heat of the Egyptian sun. Granaries were built with elevated platforms, ensuring that stored grain remained safe from rising waters. Even temples and ceremonial structures were designed with consideration of the river's behavior, ensuring that spiritual centers remained both accessible and protected. In this way, the physical landscape of Egypt became intertwined with the natural rhythm of the Nile, reflecting a thoughtful coexistence between human needs and environmental conditions. Culturally, the floods reinforced patterns of cooperation and community cohesion. Seasonal preparation required collective effort, which strengthened social bonds and created a sense of shared responsibility. Villages and towns developed norms and practices that emphasized collaboration, foresight, and patience, qualities that endured over generations. These values were reinforced by stories, rituals, and festivals that celebrated the river's generosity and educated each new generation in the wisdom of harmonious living. In this sense, the floods shaped not only the land but also the social and moral fabric of Egyptian civilization. The spiritual impact of the floods was equally enduring. Egyptians viewed the river as a divine gift, and the predictability of its cycles reinforced a sense of cosmic order. Temples, offerings, and rituals honored the river and its deities, providing both spiritual reassurance and cultural continuity. Even in years when the floods were less generous or unusually high, these practices reminded people of their connection to the natural world and to each other. Faith and observation were intertwined, creating a society in which spiritual understanding complemented practical survival. Trade and transportation were also influenced by the floods. Canals and navigable waterways connected settlements, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture. The river became a quiet artery through which Egyptian civilization flowed, enabling communication and coordination across vast distances. In this way, the floods indirectly supported the growth of cities, regional economies, and cultural cohesion, weaving together communities along the Nile in both practical and symbolic ways. Even subtle aspects of daily life were shaped by the river's behavior. Seasonal calendars were developed based on flood cycles, determining planting schedules, religious festivals, and communal labor projects. This gentle structuring of time provided predictability, reducing anxiety and reinforcing a sense of order in daily life. People learned to synchronize their activities with natural rhythms, creating a slow, deliberate flow of existence that balanced human activity with environmental cycles. Over time, the cumulative effect of these adaptations was profound. The floods, once potentially threatening, became a source of resilience, prosperity, and cultural richness. They nurtured a civilization capable of enduring for millennia, teaching lessons in patience, observation, and the quiet power of collaboration. Life along the Nile became a testament to the principle that humans do not always need to conquer nature to thrive. Sometimes survival and prosperity emerge from careful attention, gentle adaptation, and harmonious coexistence. In reflection, the long-term impact of the Nile's floods was not measured solely in fertile fields or abundant harvests. It was measured in the creation of a society attuned to natural rhythms, capable of cooperative planning, and deeply connected to both land and water. The quiet genius of the Egyptians lay in their ability to transform an annual challenge into a foundation for enduring life, culture, and civilization. Through observation, adaptation, and respect for the river, they created a world that was both stable and flexible, practical and spiritual, peaceful and resilient. By understanding the long-term effects of the floods, we gain insight into a civilization that harmonized with the natural world in subtle, patient, and profound ways. The Nile shaped Egypt's landscape, economy, culture, and spirituality, leaving a legacy of endurance and balance that resonates across history. In its steady, predictable rhythm, the river taught lessons that remain timeless: patience, preparation, collaboration, and respect for the quiet power of nature. As we reach the gentle close of our journey along the banks of the Nile, it becomes clear that the story of ancient Egyptian survival is not one of sudden heroics or dramatic feats. Rather, it is a story of quiet observation, thoughtful adaptation, and patient cooperation, an enduring rhythm in which humans learn to live in harmony with one of nature's most powerful forces. The floods, while potentially overwhelming, became a steady presence, guiding life, shaping civilization, and teaching lessons that echo across millennia. The first lesson of survival lay in observation. Egyptians watched the river carefully, noting its levels, colors, and subtle signs. They understood that the smallest details, how the reeds bent, how birds moved, or how clouds gathered in distant lands, could offer critical insight into the coming season. This patient attentiveness allowed them to anticipate challenges and respond calmly. Life along the Nile was not rushed. It was deliberate, synchronized with the natural flow of water and time itself. Through this gentle practice, people cultivated not only practical skills but a deep sense of awareness and mindfulness, qualities that allowed them to coexist peacefully with a force far greater than themselves. Adaptation followed observation. Villages and families adjusted their daily routines to align with the river's patterns. Homes were raised, canals and basins managed, and crops planted according to the flood cycles. These adaptations were subtle yet profound, demonstrating that survival does not always require confrontation. Instead, it often emerges from patience, creativity, and harmony. The Egyptians' methods of engineering and agriculture exemplify this principle: careful modifications that worked with nature rather than against it, guided by knowledge, experience, and a calm, deliberate rhythm. Community played a central role in survival. Flood preparation and response were never solitary endeavors; they were collective acts, requiring cooperation, coordination, and shared wisdom. Villages reinforced levers together, shared tools and labor, and stocked granaries collectively. Knowledge of the river was passed down through generations, creating networks of skill, experience, and trust. In these quiet collaborations, life gained stability and challenges became manageable. The flood, though immense and powerful, was met with calm confidence because people had learned that working together created resilience. Spiritual connection further reinforced survival. By honoring Hapi, the god of the Nile, and participating in rituals and festivals, Egyptians intertwined practical preparation with spiritual mindfulness. Prayer, offerings, and ceremonial celebrations provided reassurance, strengthened communal bonds, and framed the river's power as both natural and sacred. This spiritual perspective encouraged patience, reduced anxiety, and reinforced the belief that humans were participants in a harmonious cycle rather than victims of chaos. Faith and observation complemented one another, creating a holistic system for navigating life's challenges. The long-term impact of these approaches is evident in the enduring civilization along the Nile. Cities grew, agriculture thrived, trade networks expanded, and culture flourished. The river shaped architecture, social organization, religious practice, and daily routines. Yet at the core of all these achievements was the same principle: careful attention to natural rhythms, gentle adaptation, and a quiet partnership with the environment. The Egyptians did not conquer the Nile, they listened to it, learned from it, and moved with it, creating a world of remarkable stability, abundance and resilience. Even in moments of solitude, the lessons of the Nile remain visible. Standing along the riverbanks, one can imagine the quiet movements of villagers, the slow rise of the water, and the soft rustle of reeds in the breeze. The river, steady and patient, offered both challenge and nourishment, teaching a rhythm of life that was measured, calm and enduring. Ancient Egyptians learned to synchronize with this rhythm, finding security in preparation, cooperation and respect for the natural world. It is this harmony that ensured their survival season after season, generation after generation. Ultimately, the story of surviving the floods of the Nile is a meditation on patience, foresight and balance. It reminds us that resilience does not always require dramatic action. Sometimes it comes from careful observation, quiet adaptation and cooperation with both nature and community. It is a lesson in gentle persistence, showing how humans can thrive not by dominating the environment, but by moving with its currents, understanding its cycles, and embracing its rhythms. As the river flows endlessly toward the Mediterranean, so too does the knowledge of these ancient practices flow through history, offering timeless insights into the delicate balance between life, nature, and human ingenuity. The floods that once shaped survival now offer reflection, a serene reminder that careful attention, collaboration and harmony can transform challenges into enduring stability, and that life, when approached with patience and respect, can flourish even in the presence of nature's immense and unpredictable power. And so, as the sun sets over the Nile and the soft murmur of the river continues, we leave the banks of ancient Egypt with a gentle understanding that survival is both practical and poetic, both deliberate and serene. The people of the Nile endured not by rushing or resisting, but by moving with patience, planning with care, and living in harmony with a river that gave life as much as it demanded respect. In their story we find a quiet wisdom, a soothing rhythm, and a lesson in the art of living in balance with the world around us.